We left off with the Donners and the Reeds about ready to leave Illinois, heading towards St. Louis, Missouri, which was the taking off point for people traveling west. In our wagons, there are even more school books, Elitha Donner added impressively. Mother is talking about establishing a young ladies' seminary in California. She even threatens to give us botany lessons on the way. The less studious members of the group groaned. Girls of Virginia's age were more interested in beaux than botany. Beaux is young men. One after another, they kissed each other goodbye. There was a strange tightness in Virginia's throat when she realized that the moment of parting had really come. "Oh, Mary," she cried, embracing her favorite cousin, "we won't be able to have any more good times together, will we? Maybe we'll never see each other again." "You can write me a letter when you get to California," Mary reminded her. "I will," Virginia promised. "I'll write you the longest letter there ever was and tell you everything that happens on the way." Mrs. Reed was crying as she helped the younger children into the wagon. Mr. Reed gripped hand after hand in farewell. "I am honored that so many prominent citizens have come to see us off," he said to his brother-in-law as they went back into the big square white house that had been Virginia's home ever since she could remember. A cheer went up and tears were forgotten as both men returned, carrying Grandma Keys between them. Her old eyes were alight with the spirit of adventure as she waved her thin hand in response to their cheers. "Your grandmother's pretty old to be taking a trip like this, isn't she?" one of Virginia's schoolmates asked when the cheers had subsided and Grandma had been comfortably placed on a feather bed inside the palace wagon. "She wants to take care of Mama," laughed Virginia. "Poor Grandma. She can't seem to realize that Mama is grown up and can take care of herself. Seriously, Ma does have headaches. We're hoping the mild climate in California will cure them. They've been worse ever since the baby died in January. We all had colds, but in California there won't be any more cruel winters. Mr. Hastings says in his book that it's as warm in December as it is in May." Won't you miss the snow?" "A little," Virginia admitted. "I will miss all of you." "We may follow you there if it turns out to be a good place for marrying," remarked Henriette, a plain girl who seemed to think she would have a difficult time finding herself a husband in Springfield. "I'll let you know what the chances are," Virginia promised as she swung over the back of her pony Billy. Her father, now riding ahead on Glaucus, his gray racing mare, shouted, "Let her go, boys!" The teamsters ripped the air with the bullwhacks, and the wagons began to move. It was quite a caravan that wound its way through the streets of Springfield on the sunny April morning. Virginia, riding ahead on her pony, counted 9 or 10 wagons. None of them could compare with their own palace car. People came out of their houses to watch as the wagons passed, and many friends and relatives on horseback traveled with them as far as the first camping ground. Children ran alongside, cheering and calling goodbye. "Good luck! Safe journeying!" everyone shouted. One pious old soul added a devout, "God bless you," for which Virginia was thankful. An impressionable girl, she remembered it all exactly as it happened. Years later, this and other memories were to serve her well when the group became famous as the Donner Party of martyr pioneers, and people everywhere were eager for details of the long trek. No one could have predicted that they were heading for a disaster. It was such a well-stocked wagon train. The artistic mother of the Donner girls had brought along watercolors, brushes, and oils, as well as books and school supplies for the seminary she hoped to establish. Besides these, there was quite an ordinary-looking quilt, into which the girls suspected she had secretly stitched a quantity of money. "Mother's taking awfully good care of that old quilt," Elitha and Leanna had observed. The treasures brought along by the Reed family were more in evidence. The richest outfit on the prairie, they were called by the other emigrants who later joined the Reed Donner train. Certainly everything that a family could possibly desire for comfortable living in California was crowded beneath the bulging wagon tops. The maid Eliza had helped Virginia and Patty pack their prettiest dresses in stout canvas bags. Finally, she had agreed to come along with them. Virginia giggled and said to Milt, She's caught the fever, too. More likely she's off to catch herself a husband, Milt returned. She can count me out. I don't fancy my women that heavy. Virginia didn't dare ask how he did fancy them. He was one of her father's teamsters, and in his eyes she was only a little girl. Several young men had been hired as teamsters to drive the Reed Donner wagons. So driving these wagons, big, huge, full wagons with oxen, was not an easy thing, and not an average person could do that. It was a difficult task. And so, I'm just turning on the lights because it's getting a little darker in my house. So, they would have to hire men called teamsters who were professional wagon drivers. And you would want to hire a professional because that way your things would get safely across the prairie. So if I were just driving a wagon and oxen, we would not get safely across the prairie. So you'd hire a professional. 5 dogs ran below, barking excitedly and sometimes dashing back to the end of the train where Jacob Donner's 2 stepsons and Eliza's brother Bayless were driving the cows and the extra saddle horses. The first day's journey was a short one. In spite of good resolutions, it had been nearly noon when the wagons started, and there were many stops for final visits with old friends who ran out to say goodbye. Patty patiently held up the wagon flap so that Grandma Keys could have a last look at her old home as they drove out of Springfield. Not until they were well into the country did she let it drop. All this time, Milt Elliott had been walking along beside the oxen, flicking his bullwhack lightly over their heads and calling his monotonous "Gee, ha, ho there." The wagons were so heavy that everybody was invited to get out and walk when they crossed the first bridge. So normally if you were taking a wagon across the country, you would walk. All of your stuff that was in the wagon was really heavy, and so you wouldn't want to add your own weight to the weight of all the things in the wagon that the oxen had to pull. So if you were a kid, you walked beside the wagon. If you were a woman, you walked beside the wagon. If you were a man, you walked beside the wagon. Most people did not ride in the wagons, and there wasn't really room for them inside the wagon. The Reed family was one of the exceptions because their wagon had their grandmother in it, and so they had custom built a bed in there for Grandma. So she was probably the only one that actually stayed in the wagon. The wagons were so heavy that everybody was invited to get out and walk when they crossed the first bridge. Virginia, riding proudly on her cream-colored pony, watched the proceedings skeptically. "Be sure the oxen hit the bridge, Milt," she called in a worried voice. "Remember, Grandma is in the wagon." How he laughed at the idea of the oxen missing the bridge. Virginia thought she would never hear the last of it. "Puss here was afraid the oxen would miss the bridge," he told John Denton, a young Englishman traveling with the George Donner family. "She'll really have something to worry about when we cross the California mountains," John said. "Even Hastings admits that the new trail is narrow." "He got through, didn't he? Took a whole wagon train clean through to Oregon in '42. Met up with a band of Sioux and barely escaped with his life. But that didn't stop him." "You are right, Milt," George Donner declared. "Luck was with him every time. Only last year he crossed the mountains in December and got through to Sutter's Fort just ahead of the first big snowstorm." "We may not be that lucky," his wife Tamsin reminded him gently. The younger Donners may have felt their mother's anxiety, but Elitha and Leanna, Tamsin's stepdaughters, sided with their father. "We'll make it all right. We're starting early enough," he reassured everybody. "How does the song go, John? You've got your fiddle." Soon they were all singing around the blazing campfires. They sang everything from gospel hymns to Pike County Rose, the new song George Donner had mentioned. Determination was in their voices as they began on the chorus. "We'll swim the wide rivers and cross the tall peaks and camp on the prairie for weeks upon weeks. Come sin and starvation and hard work and slaughter, we'll reach California in spite of hell and high water." And here's the picture of them inside the wagon, and they're looking out. They've lifted the flap. and they're looking outside. All right. We're going to stop right there with that lovely song about hell and high water. And I hope you enjoyed reading a little bit about the Donner Reed party. And I will